Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beatles Bible. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most crazy what-ifs in music history. Imagine this. John Lennon, of all people, was eager for a Beatles reunion? What? This story might have flew under the radar for most fans, and I was in shock when I stumbled upon it. It's on the Paul McCartney Project website. Let's have a look. What do you think would have appealed to John Lennon about the Anthology documentary? That we finally put something together? That we finally got it out of the way? Obviously, I'm guessing, but I suspect that he would have been glad it was done. I think it might have been, in fact, I'm sure it would have been different if John had been alive to have his say. There were certain little stories that were removed from the Anthology because, one, they might offend people or give the wrong idea, and two, we wondered, is it absolutely necessary to have all the warts in all versions? Was the original intention to tell the full story unexpurgated? We started off speaking as much truth as we could remember, and it was first assembled straight with no compromises. Then each one of us was asked if there was anything that bothered us. And there were little things that wouldn't have bothered me, but bothered other people. It wasn't so much removing the truth as not putting in something unnecessary. I don't think there was a whitewash, although I was concerned that there would be, mainly because I thought there would be certain people who would really feel it was me whitewashing. Strangely enough, I'm probably the only person who didn't. I was slightly dreading looking at the last episode because that's sort of who broke up the Beatles territory. And actually, I'm glad that we didn't deal with it that way. The director, I think, has done a much more clever thing, where he says it happened. We came full cycle, there were problems. But we didn't go surgically into them and expose the blood and gore. There were some bad moments, but even after all that crap that we went through and all the stuff John laid on me, and all that how do you sleep at night, and all the real bitter stuff that he came out with in the press, we were able to end up, thank God, chatting about putting the cat out and baking bread and raising Sean. It says something for our relationship that we were able to go through all of that, and yet come back and still be friends. And make free as a bird, the interviewer adds. And then for the three of us to make free as a bird, yes. There was some comment I read in the press recently where someone wrote, "In the mood Lennon was in when he wrote this, he certainly wouldn't have wanted McCartney to get his mitts all over it." You know, the old chestnut. In actual fact, the journalist has got his history wrong. What he means is, in the mood John was in a couple of years before he wrote it, he might not have wanted McCartney to get his hands on it. Which brings me to something I remembered when reading that. John phoned me once to try and get the Beatles back together again, after we'd broken up. And I wasn't for it, because I thought that we'd come too far, and I was too deeply hurt by it all. I thought, nah, what'll happen is that we'll get together for another 3 days, and all hell will break loose again. Maybe we should just leave it alone. What? This changes everything. If Paul is saying the truth, of course. And for the record, I believe he is. What baffles me more is that the interview didn't try to get more out of Paul after this statement. Paul will sometimes just drop these bombs right in the middle of a random interview, and it just flies under the radar. If John really phoned Paul trying to reunite the Beatles, this changes the whole narrative of what we know post-breakup. Because John, along with George, was the most vocal about being absolutely opposed to a reunion. Did he change his mind? We know John could contradict himself easily, and his emotions could vary heavily around the times.
You know, when are they coming back, and when are they going to do this, and what do you think of Paul, and what do you think of George? You know, I don't think that old gang of mine, you know, that's all over. You know, when I met Yoko is when you meet your first woman and you leave the guys at the bar and you don't go play football anymore and you don't go play snooker or billiards. Yeah. Maybe some guys like to do it every Friday night or something, you know, continue that relationship with the boys. But once I found the woman, the boys became of no interest whatsoever. That's all over for that. Not a chance in hell.
Is it because you don't have any interest in it? Is that why the answer is no?
Well, what did I say to that girl? You want to go back to college?
Yeah.
Why should I go back 10 years to provide an illusion for you which I know doesn't exist?
Right, which you don't believe in the first place.
Which cannot exist.
Yeah.
It cannot exist.
What about just to make, you do acknowledge that
Why should the Beatles give more? Didn't they give everything on goddamn earth for 10 years?
So, maybe, again, if Paul's recollection is true, and we'll never know because John isn't around anymore, maybe, even for a moment, John thought, hey, why not get the band back together again? That'd be fun. This brings even more merit to the idea that the Beatles would have almost certainly reunited in the 80s, probably for the Live Aid benefit concert in 1985. Maybe if enough time had passed and there was just enough nostalgia and momentum, it could have happened. Paul was keen to get back to his past in the 80s with works like Return to Pepperland and Give My Regards to Broad Street. George did a Beatles homage with When We Was Fab. Sure, this nostalgia might have been inspired by John's tragic passing, but if you believe the theory that nostalgia usually happens around 20 years after the event was happened, it is not a stretch to say that the Beatles' nostalgia would have been at its peak had John been alive or not. Unfortunately, it never happened. John died way too soon in order for a reunion to be possible, and without John, Paul, George, and Ringo, there are no Beatles. Still, this is a fascinating, quote-unquote, new discovery that adds a lot more layers to the Beatles' lore, and I think it really shows how many details can be unknown to us fans, even decades later. But what do you think? Do you believe Paul, or is he distorting the truth? That's up to you. I believe him personally. Leave a comment below. That's all I have for you today. See you next time.